Dear friends, I'd like to welcome everybody who joined us. Ukraine Media Center to Ukraine Forum continues its work, and right now in our studio we have Tamila, Tasheva, permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Tamila, you're welcome. You have recently been appointed to this position, so could you please tell us about your first steps and how Ukraine's strategy will change about the occupation of Crimea? Hello everybody, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes indeed. On the 25th of April, the President of Ukraine appointed me as his permanent representative, but I can tell you that about Ukraine's policies about the occupation of territories, there will be no significant changes, and I will explain why. Because the strategy of the occupation and reintegration of temporarily occupied Crimean Peninsula was approved as early as in 2021. On the 26th of February of 2021, at the session at the meeting of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, and it was implemented through decree by the President. Also, the President's representative office has its own strategy of development until the occupation and retaking control of temporarily occupied Crimea. I continue the work that we started almost 3 years ago when the President of Ukraine entrusted us and mandated us to work as part of President's team for the subject of Crimea. So our office continues its work almost in the same format it was operating before. Why am I saying almost? Because before the full-fledged invasion into Ukraine, we had our office in Kherson. At the moment, unfortunately, since the city of Kherson is not controlled by Ukraine, our office temporarily ceased its operations there. Unfortunately, at the end of March, occupying forces took our building in the city of Kherson. Our employees were forced to leave city of Kherson and Kherson Oblast, and now we run our operations from different parts of Ukraine, in particular from city of Kyiv, where most of our office and people are. Also, since the last year, we operate as a national office of Crimean Platform. I would like to remind you that Crimean Platform was launched in August last year, and basically we also implement those responsibilities. And I'd like to remind you that the Crimean Platform continues to exist, and actually now this is almost only international venue, because the Minsk process has been actually destroyed, it does not work. So Crimean Platform is the only venue for negotiations, the only mechanism to work on the occupation of Crimean Peninsula and for other communications with partner countries. How have the activities of Crimean Platform transformed? Because indeed we remember how it started in a very powerful way, but how has it transformed during this time of full-scale invasion? The National Office of the Crimean Platform works first of all on internal domestic issues, because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is in charge of so-called international track, international activities, and of course they continue their work, and as soon as next week we'll have a meeting with representatives of member countries in the Crimean Platform, and also we will speak on behalf of our country to provide information of what's happening in the Crimean Peninsula after a full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine. About our work, I can say that we focused our attention first of all on two big sets of issues. One is informational support of what's going on in the peninsula within the context of full-scale invasion. This is one big area of activity, so we communicate messages from Ukraine in the territory of Crimea, because there are many Russian propaganda narratives there in Crimea, so it's very important for us to get our message across to Crimea, and it's also important for us to get information from Crimea and give it to Ukrainian public and to our international partners, including foreign media. And the second big area of our activities is we continue to communicate with our Ukrainian citizens as active participants, activists from Crimea who participated, for example, in some anti-war protests, mostly single protests, but after that they were forced to leave Crimea, as well as with citizens of Ukraine who reside in Crimea, but they have to go from Crimea through the territory of the Russian Federation when they move to third countries, and they approach us to get some advice, how to get documents to return to Ukraine and so on. So this is a huge area of our activities which we don't stop. Of course, the last big area is our work with foreign partners. We communicate with diplomatic missions accredited in Ukraine. We travel abroad if we need to communicate abroad, so that the topic of Crimea should always remain on the agenda in Ukraine, as well as it should remain on the agenda for our partner countries who joined the Crimean Platform and who understand that the war did not start on the 24th of February. It was emphasized more than once by the President of Ukraine. The war started in February 2014, and the war will come to an end with the occupation of all our territories. It's also very important to mention that for a long time the Russian Federation did not want to communicate in any way about temporarily occupied Crimean Peninsula, but our negotiators managed to bring the Crimean issue back into the agenda. And now we see that Kremlin, its leadership, continues mentioning Crimea all the time. Of course, they are worried that we will bring Crimea back also in a military way. We said more than once in our that our strategy of the occupation is about, first of all, diplomatic taking of Crimea, as Crimean Peninsula as our territory, but we all understand that the whole situation with newly occupied territories and those occupied in 2014 will be resolved both in the battlefield and in the negotiations by political and diplomacy way. Mr. Tasheva, what is the situation in Crimea at the moment? Do you have any information about what's going on there? Of course, we carry out target monitoring of the situation using both open sources and using our own sources of information. Generally, it's worth saying that Crimea has become that sort of military base for the Russian Federation to attack our territory. Military base, military foothold. They did not need it as a territory for usual citizens to live, but they needed it first of all as a military base. And I'd like to remind you that during 8 years since the occupation of Crimea, 32,000 of the military personnel remained in Crimea all the time. And for example, in spring last year or autumn this year, and by the time of invasion, there were 10,000 more of military personnel in so we are talking about at least 42,000 military personnel who were there in Crimea at the moment of full-scale invasion. Also in the Crimean Peninsula, starting from 2014, there has been conscription, and conscription started from the 1st of April. Also in Crimea, at least 5,000 people are drafted to the Russian army every year. And I have to say that conscripts from Crimea are sent in a very active way to war against Ukraine. From our sources, I think the numbers are actually higher, but that's what we can check. Recently, at least 72 people have been buried in Crimea. According to the verified information, we know that 41 of those people who died are from Crimea, so most probably they are citizens of Ukraine, because in those documents it says that they were born in Crimea. And if they resided there, by the time of occupation, they are citizens of Ukraine. This is illegal for Russian Federation. This is an international crime, war crime, because the occupying country is not entitled to drafting people from those occupied territories as conscripts. Even according to the Russian legislation, it's prohibited to draft those conscripts. But as we can see from that flagship Moscow cruiser, and based on the data from journalists' investigations and another data, more than 50% of personnel on that cruiser was those conscripts, including conscripts from Crimea. A second thing which is very important to mention is that this is the base for assault. For example, at the moment of invasion, I was on a business trip, on the official trip in the city of Lviv, and there were some rocket strikes in Lviv, and those rockets came also from the Black Sea, from Sevastopol, and also a number of other Ukrainian cities was hit by rockets launched from Black Sea region. So we understand that Crimea has been used to full scale in war against Ukraine, because the territory of Crimea is now controlled by the Russian Federation. Another thing which is very important to mention is that forced deportation of Russian citizens from mainland Ukraine, in particular from Mariupol, from Kherson Oblast, or people are just forced to leave through the territory of Crimea because other routes of evacuation are impossible. And in the same way as in separate districts of Donetsk and Luhansk province, people are deprived of their passport, they have to go through so-called filtering. It particularly applies to males. Very often males, but also females, their Ukrainian passports are taken from them, and they are issued documents for some temporary refuge, and then they cannot leave Crimea or leave Russian Federation, and we try to help such people through consular offices of Ukraine in third countries in Russian Federation. And it's very important to mention anti-war protests in Crimea. According to the data of the occupational administration courts, there have been at least 36 administrative cases for anti-war protests or comments on social media, or distribution of leaflets, some painting in public places and in different places in Crimea. But according to our monitoring, there have been more than 50 administrative cases, so we cannot say that in Crimea no protests take place. They do take place, and people understand all too well that their children are drafted and sent to war against Ukraine, and of course people are not happy with that. I would like to pay special attention to Kherson province, those newly occupied territories neighboring the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. According to our information, more than about 500 people stay in basements where they are tortured. It goes in a very active way in the city of Kherson and on the administrative boundary with Crimea. For example, in such towns as Novoalexeyevka and Henichsk, occupational administrations or the military come with whole lists of activists who participated in that sick blockade of Crimea in 2015, or for example, people who served in the anti-terrorist operation and those who would like to be drafted to the Ukrainian army now. They come, occupational people come to their home, they kidnap them. That's the same scenario we saw in 2014, when the military comes and then the information space is cleaned, and activists and journalists, and then there is so-called referendum. And here we see various scenarios in Kherson Oblast or in other newly occupied territories. First, they consider a scenario of a referendum. Now they consider a scenario whereby those oblasts would join Crimea. And we see it in public discussions. in the Crimean Peninsula, in some communications of the occupation administration, occupation government of Crimea, and there whole stories by so-called Crimean media, like Crimea 24, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and so on. So we see that they consider various scenarios, but it's completely true what our intelligence, Ukrainian intelligence said, that there is a completely probable scenario of joining them with Crimea and creating so-called Crimean Federal District. Also, I think that many people are interested in what about water supply to Crimea. Indeed, water came to Crimea in February when territories were occupied. The water started coming as a free flow to Jankoy, city of Jankoy. You don't need any pumps for that, but then after first 200 kilometers, you need to use some pumps to pump that water, and the occupation administration still has problems with those. But according to our state environmental inspectorate, there have been already more than 2 billion hryvnias of damages made to Ukraine. This is huge damage to Ukraine, and of course it will be a component of what we will recover from the Russian Federation when we'll get reparations. We'll have to take it into account. Ms. Tasheva, we heard that near Mariupol there are some filtration camps. Are you aware of such facts in Crimea or in Kherson Oblast? Yes, I'll repeat that in territories of temporarily occupied Crimea, closer to administrative boundary, there are such camps. People are forcefully brought from newly occupied territories, including, in particular, Mariupol. People are brought not only to certain districts of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, so-called Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, but also through Crimea. And everybody passes that filtering, so those males have to remove their clothes to stay naked. They look for any tattoos which would confirm any participation in Ukrainian armed forces or any affiliation with Ukrainian military units. So that's what they do, and then it becomes the basis for criminal cases. There have been criminal cases already initiated in Crimea, where Russians say that they have captured some people who arrived for some terrorist attacks, or they are some saboteurs and so on. That's not a surprise for us, because for 8 years they kept committing those crimes in the territory of Crimean Peninsula. But the scale of those crimes that we see in our country, with whole cities being destroyed, with thousands of innocent civilians who died and our military who died, of course it's incomparable with the crimes taking place in Crimea. But these are signs of the systematic policies by Russian Federation also in Crimea. Ms. Tasheva, we have all seen also in public sources information that since the beginning of full-scale invasion in Ukraine, residents of Crimea started selling their real estate on a mass scale. Do you have such information? Do people indeed leave the peninsula? People have been leaving the Crimean Peninsula in a very active way. Both usual civilians, residents of Ukraine, because they don't want to serve in the Russian army. And we, as a representative office, advised them that to avoid being drafted to the Russian army, they should better either leave the territory of Crimean Peninsula, and that's what people actively do, especially those of the respective age, or they should try and hide somewhere in the territory of Crimea. They should not receive those summons. They should change their phone numbers and so on, because even though according to international law, Ukraine also considers those forcefully conscripted, forcefully drafted to the Russian army as victims. But if that person has come to the territory of Ukraine, to mainland Ukraine, and has been committing crimes here, of course it will be punished. There will be a criminal liability for that person. So we advised, and the President of Ukraine in his appeal of the 2nd of April said that. So people do leave. Also, those Russians who came to Crimea from the territory of Russian Federation, they now leave. Those include public prosecutors, judges, those working for Federal Security Service, those for Counter-Extremist Center. I would not say they're leaving Crimea on a mass scale, that this is some mass-scale exodus, but they leave in a rather active way, also trying to sell their real estate. There was some information in early March whereby there was an active attempts to get that real estate sold in Crimea. It has not been confirmed, but we, according to our information, yes, people tried to leave Crimea, including people who have been there illegally, I mean Russian citizens. I'd like to remind you that according to the information by experts and various authorities, about 500,000 people since 2014 entered the territory of Crimea and have been illegally residing in Crimea. That sort of new colonization of Crimean Peninsula. Thank you, dear colleagues. You can ask your questions. Please speak into the microphone. Do you have any questions? Thank you. Thank you. There is a whole range of questions. I'm from Ukraine Forum, and the first question is this. There are two options of the occupation of Crimea, diplomatic one and military one. About the diplomatic option, we heard some timeline of 10 to 15 years for the occupation of Crimea. Do you know, for those 10 or 15 years, has any plan been prepared? What do Crimean Tatars think about it, and whether they consider it some sort of betrayal, some sort of treason? Indeed, such proposals from the negotiating group did appear. Those were proposals for a state, but we all understand that with such proposals, Russian Federation has to respond to them. We understood all too well, we as a state, as a country, that Russian Federation would not want to communicate, to discuss any dates about Crimea. But what is important, and I emphasize that what is important is this. This topic of Crimea has been back on the agenda of negotiations. The President of Ukraine and our military political leadership emphasized more than once that we don't run any negotiations which would mean that we surrender our national interests. We are talking about the territory of Ukraine within the internationally recognized borders by 1991. So, speaking about Crimean Tatars, initially, when there are still no clarifications from the President of Ukraine and from negotiation groups, there was certain lack of understanding why is there a certain number of years. But it was emphasized also by Mustafa Jamili when he was present at the briefing, even before those proposals were announced in Istanbul. Mustafa Jamilov said that we have brought the issue of Crimea into the negotiations agenda, and this is a key thing, a key important thing. So indeed, initially Crimean Tatars did ask us, why is there that number of years? But after those explanations, after those clarifications, when we said that we are not talking about surrendering any national interests, and when we said that the law will end when we retake control, recapture control of the Ukrainian Crimea, then Crimean Tatars who are, say, active, who are passionate about it, they didn't have any questions anymore. And the second thing is there any promising plan? If there is a military success about Crimea, how to integrate Crimea faster under this track, under this option? This is a difficult issue because even though there is a strategy of the occupation and reintegration of the temporarily occupied Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, of course there is also a number of aspects which we have to regulate. What will happen after the occupation? What will happen after we regain control of our territories? It's about a number of issues, including, for example, illustration, who should take which positions, how should we treat people who continue residing in the Crimean Peninsula, working for some occupational administrations, but they did not commit any crimes. What about the staffing potential for that territory? So over the last several years, we worked jointly with the team at the Ministry of Reintegration and a number of experts of other state authorities about transitional justice for the transitional period. What are we to do after the end of this war, when we regain control of our territory? We do not, of course, we do not have answers to all questions as yet at the moment, but back to the question of military versus political diplomatic. The occupation, I already answered that question. We as a state, as a country, should be based, first of all, on our military, and we'll see what will be happening in the battlefield, first of all, although in any case, political way, diplomatic way of regaining the Crimean Peninsula is a priority, because the President of Ukraine emphasized that if we decide for the military way, then it will be about huge amount of new victims which will unfortunately have in Ukraine. So the first priority is political, diplomatic way, but we, of course, we understand that everything will be decided depending on what happens on the in combat fields, and we will count on our military armed forces of Ukraine. Another question is this: your representative office has been processing petitions from citizens, from displaced persons. Could you please tell us at the everyday level what happens, what sorts of applications of petitions they have, those people from Crimea? Well, they are very different petitions, very different appeals. Now it's first of all about receiving passports, travel passports to go abroad, because a large number of people from Crimea do not have any Ukrainian documents, or some of them don't have new photos in their passports. Some of them have their children born recently, just before the invasion. So, for example, parents have documents, but the child does not have Ukrainian documents as yet. So, various situations, all sorts of situations. So, looking at the petitions, at the requests that we get, they're mostly about receiving documents and about being able to live abroad. So we maintain communications with our representative offices abroad, and we try to sort out those situations. We try to help those people, and now I think it's about like 95% of all inquiries. Also, some people write to us saying that they can support the military and political leadership of Ukraine. Some of them send us our pictures. Some of them send us information about movements of the military in Crimea. We also receive a lot of such information, but it's very important to verify it, to check it, because we, of course, understand that people may send some unreliable information, so we use open sources and our own sources to verify that information. Thank you, Ms. Tasheva. Thank you for joining us. Dear friends, I'd like to remind you that now we have been working on our schedule for tomorrow, so watch our announcement. Thank you for staying with us.